Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the hush of the desert night. Your feet sinking just a little into the sand, the sky so wide it could swallow a thought. You're walking alongside a slow-moving caravan under a pale moon, each camel carrying silk bundles, porcelain jars, and one very precious cargo, dried, crinkled leaves that smell faintly of rain and mountains. It's the scent of tea before it even had a name. Someone hums softly, another adjusts a rope, and the rhythm of hooves begins to sound like a heartbeat. You probably wouldn't survive this trip. It takes months, and the water is never quite enough. But don't worry, you're only traveling in imagination tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there, because right now, it's midnight somewhere along the Silk Road. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert isn't silent. Not really. The night air buzzes with invisible life. Crickets fiddle, someone's kettle whistles faintly on a distant campfire. You trudge alongside a dromedary that blinks at you, unimpressed. The man walking beside you, his robe dusty, his beard threaded with silver, tells you that he's been doing this route since before his eldest daughter could talk. He calls himself Yusuf, and his trade is simple: silk out, tea in. You glance at the sacks strapped to the camels and think, really, all this fuss for leaves? Yusuf chuckles when you ask. He says, but they aren't just leaves. They're conversation dried by sun. And that's when you realize what's moving through this caravan isn't just cargo, it's stories. Every stop on the Silk Road is like a social network, centuries before Wi-Fi. People gossip, they barter, they taste, they exchange names and half-truths. It's oddly comforting. A mainstream historical fact drifts into the talk. The Silk Road wasn't a single road at all, but a web of trade routes stretching thousands of miles, linking China with Persia, India, Arabia, and eventually Europe. Along these paths, not only silk traveled, but paper, spices, religion, and yes, tea. Historians still argue whether the word Silk Road even fits. It was coined only in the 19th century by a German geographer trying to simplify something too vast to name. The caravan halts. A fire crackles. You sit, hands warming around a chipped cup of earthy-smelling brew. It's bitter, but comforting, like a story that ends softly instead of neatly. The fringe tidbit Yusuf shares is that, according to old travelers' diaries, traders along this road could tell where a merchant came from just by sniffing their tea. Tibetan tea smelt smoky, Chinese green tea grassy, Indian blends had a sweetness of rain-soaked wood. It was an olfactory passport. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes loudly into the sand, and Yusuf mutters something about desert spirits being easily startled. You pretend you didn't hear. As you sip, the stars seem to multiply. The night becomes deeper, thicker, the kind of darkness that invites thought. You imagine what it must have been like for those first merchants, leaving the safety of the city for weeks or months on end. They followed familiar constellations, trusted half-remembered maps, and prayed that the next oasis still had water. The risk was enormous, yet they came, generation after generation, lured by profit and, maybe, by the gentle addiction of the road itself. The wind picks up. A faint line of music travels through the dunes, someone strumming a two-stringed instrument, maybe a dutar. The melody rises and falls lazily, as if the night itself were nodding off. You lean back, the sand still warm beneath you, and listen. Yusuf explains that the best tea from Yunnan was traded for fine horses from Ferganah, then for gems and cloth farther west. The trade routes braided cultures together. Even your cup, simple as it is, tells a global story. Porcelain perfected in Jingdezhen, glaze recipes guarded like royal secrets, each sip a quiet miracle of labor and geography. Historians still argue whether tea really left China as early as the 2nd century BCE or centuries later. The archaeological evidence is as fragile as the leaves themselves. Crumbled bits found in ancient tombs, a faint residue in ceramic jars. You picture someone long ago, sitting with the same puzzled look you have now, wondering how something so small could travel so far. A sleepy laugh rises from another fire. Someone jokes that camels gossip too, that they remember every trader who's ever packed them wrong. Yusuf rolls his eyes and says that might explain why his camel refuses to look at him tonight. You chuckle quietly. It's the kind of a low humor that keeps a caravan sane. A faint memory of home crosses your mind. Something about your own bedtime rituals. A mug, a sound, a certain scent. Here, thousands of years ago, the same human craving for comfort hums through the camp. Tea is more than a drink. It's a pause. The desert wind cools. Sand grains whisper against the tents. The fire dies low, embers pulsing like tiny hearts. Someone murmurs a prayer in a language you don't know. And as you lie back, staring at the endless sky, you realize that this trade route, the one that carried silk and spices and gossip, also carried something else. The idea that life, no matter how far from home, could be steeped slowly into peace. You're almost asleep, your mind steeping too. The night's warmth fades into a mild chill. You pull your cloak tighter and close your eyes, hearing only the rhythmic grunt of camels and the faint hiss of wind through dunes. The first step of the world's biggest story has begun. One sip, one step, one whispered rumor. Morning creeps in softly across the desert, brushing light over the dunes like a hand smoothing out a blanket. You wake up to the sound of kettle lids clinking, water bubbling, and the low hum of traders preparing to move again. There's a faint tang of smoke in the air mixed with something green and floral, the tea that started it all. Yusuf offers you a small clay cup, the steam curling like a spirit. He says, "This leaf came from Yunnan, where the mountains breathe clouds." You take a sip. It's sharper now, earthy, alive. As you drink, you follow his story backwards, tracing the journey of the humble Camellia sinensis plant to its wild origins. The misty hills of Yunnan, deep in southwestern China, are the cradle of tea. Imagine narrow terraces carved into mountain slopes, trees heavy with glossy leaves, and farmers moving slowly through the fog like ghosts. Tea didn't start in neat plantations. It began as a wild shrub, half weed, half miracle. Monkeys and birds nibbled at its leaves long before people realized they could boil them for comfort. Historians still argue whether tea was first used as medicine or as a simple pick-me-up. One camp says it began with healers chewing leaves to ease fatigue. Another insists farmers discovered its magic by accident, when leaves fell into boiling water. Either way, someone took a sip, paused, and thought, "That's not bad." You picture that first accidental brew, wood smoke, a cracked pot, the hiss of rain on coals. The drinker probably didn't call it tea or cha or te. It was just warmth, something to hold in both hands. Here comes your first cheeky joke of the morning. You probably wouldn't last 10 minutes in that forest. Between the leeches, humidity, and mysterious buzzing things, you'd be reconsidering civilization. But you'd smell the tea even through the mud, the faint citrusy edge of young leaves drying in the sun. Yusuf tells you legends as the caravan begins to pack. There's the tale of Emperor Shen Nong, the mythical ruler who demanded all water be boiled before drinking. One day, a few leaves blew into his pot, turning it golden. He tasted it, liked it, and declared it a gift from heaven. It's the story so famous that every Chinese child learns it. Yet historians still debate whether Shen Nong ever existed. He's like the George Washington of beverage myths, useful, dignified, and almost certainly embellished. You walk alongside the caravan again. The camels grunt like disgruntled librarians. You ask Yusuf whether tea has always been this important. He nods slowly. In Yunnan, they drink it with salt. In Sichuan, with pepper. It's food, not drink. That's your quirky tidbit of the day. Early tea wasn't sipped delicately. It was cooked into soup with garlic, ginger, or even onions. Imagine that serving at your next brunch. The sun rises higher, turning the dunes pink, then gold. You squint ahead as the caravan snakes across the sand. Each step feels like time itself dragging forward. You realize that tea, like these journeys, depends on patience. It can't be rushed. It has to steep. By midday, you reach a small oasis town. Palms rustle over mud brick homes. A few traders greet Yusuf with cheerful shouts. They've met before. In this world, everyone knows everyone. There's a tea house here, low-roofed and cool inside. You duck in to escape the glare. The air smells of straw mats, smoke, and that unmistakable leaf. The owner pours boiling water from a battered kettle into a tall clay jar. The liquid blooms from clear to amber, like sunrise in miniature. He doesn't stir, doesn't rush, just watches. You realize that tea isn't just a drink, it's a pace, a philosophy, maybe even a rebellion against urgency. A group of traders nearby are debating loudly, something about whether Yunnan tea or Sichuan tea fetches higher prices in Samarkand. Historians still argue about this too. Which region truly birthed the culture of tea trade?
The caravan rolls on, and soon the clay plains give way to a patchwork of rocky ridges and sun-baked valleys. You trudge alongside Yusuf, dust swirling around your ankles, carrying the faint scent of tea from the jars that bob gently on the camels' backs. The terrain is rougher now, and each step feels deliberate, a meditation in motion. You notice how the sunlight plays across the rocks, turning them from rusty red to pale gold, and imagine that the same travelers you follow may have paused here centuries ago, squinting against the glare and wondering whether the oasis ahead actually exists. Soon you arrive at a small Persian-style courtyard, the first sign of urban life in days. Low, sun-bleached walls frame an inner garden, and a fountain trickles a soft song of moving water. Orange trees sway lazily, releasing fragrant bursts of blossom into the still air. A few merchants linger, their voices soft but purposeful, bartering in a language that seems musical even to your untrained ears. This is one of those places where goods, ideas, and news converge, the very heart of the Silk Road's network. Yusuf motions you to sit on a sun-warmed stone bench beneath a latticework trellis. He begins to tell you about Sogdian traders, the masters of cultural exchange and rumor, who often acted as intermediaries between Chinese and Persian merchants. These traders didn't just move silk and spices, they were historians, diplomats, and most importantly, gossip carriers. A fact to savor, the Sogdians were so influential that their language and scripts spread along the Silk Road, leaving traces as far as the Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether they were truly the glue of East-West commerce, or if their importance has been exaggerated by romantic accounts of the Silk Road. As you sip a strong, bitter brew from a small porcelain cup, Yusuf leans in with a grin. You know, he says, some tea houses in these courtyards had more secrets than the emperor's palace. People whispered and letters were passed quietly between pots of tea. That's your quirky tidbit. Tea served as a kind of social lubricant where the right sip could start negotiations, end disputes, or even determine who inherited a caravan route. You probably won't survive reading these secret histories, but at least your imagination does. The courtyard feels alive with subtle rhythms, the soft tap of feet on stone, the chatter of distant merchants, the rustle of leaves above. You watch a small child chase a stray cat, laughing as the feline darts through the shadows. It's easy to see why tea and conversation were inseparable here. Each cup is not just a drink, but a prelude to stories, disputes, and delicate diplomacy. Yusuf describes the ceremonial etiquette of pouring tea, learned from years of observing Persian customs. One must tilt the cup just so, allow the leaves to swirl gently, and never, ever rush. The gesture conveys respect, patience, and an unspoken understanding of the social hierarchy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely symbolic or largely performative, but in this moment, as you mirror the motion, it feels meaningful enough. Outside the courtyard, the wind picks up slightly, carrying the scent of far-off spices and distant deserts. You close your eyes briefly, letting it swirl around you like a gentle veil.
The aroma of the tea mingles with orange blossoms and dust, creating a strange but comforting cocktail of memory and place. A merchant seated nearby leans toward you and whispers about the tea code, a set of signs and gestures that could communicate trade secrets or warnings without a word being spoken. It's a reminder that this network of tea and gossip is subtle, layered, and quietly powerful. You can almost imagine messages hopping from cup to cup, caravan to caravan, whispering of fortunes gained or lost, of new alliances forming across continents. You take another slow sip, savoring the warmth that spreads from your hands to your chest. For a moment, you feel suspended in time, walking the same pathways, observing the same rituals, and tasting the same leaves that countless traders and travelers have encountered over centuries. The courtyard isn't just a resting place, it's a microcosm of the Silk Road itself, commerce, culture, and human curiosity interwoven with tea. As the sun tilts westward, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you rise with Yusuf to continue the journey. The camels are restless, and the road beckons once more. You glance back at the fountain and orange trees, knowing that somewhere beneath those branches, countless stories, some true, some embellished, have begun to travel the world just as surely as tea. The heat of the afternoon has softened into a golden glow as the caravan winds through a narrow valley, dust settling over your shoulders like a gentle shawl. You trudge alongside Yusuf, the rhythmic plod of the camels almost hypnotic, and notice that the air feels slightly cooler here, scented faintly with wild herbs growing between the stones. Somewhere a bird calls, its note echoing against the cliffs, and you think, not for the first time, how remarkably alive this desert feels when you're moving through it at the pace of history. Yusuf begins to speak about monks traveling along these trade routes, carrying not just scriptures but tales and techniques for brewing tea. Some were ascetics, walking barefoot for days, others scholars, pausing only to exchange a cup or a word. The mainstream historical fact is that Buddhist monks were instrumental in spreading tea northward into China and eventually into Japan. Their journeys intertwined meditation, commerce, and the simple pleasure of a warm beverage. Historians still argue whether tea was originally valued more for its caffeine or its sacred symbolism, but either way, it became a spiritual companion. You pause to sip from your own cup, inhaling the earthy aroma. Yusuf's voice softens as he begins telling one of his favorite stories about a monk who, traveling through the desert with a small caravan, would sprinkle powdered tea into his sandals to stay alert on long marches. You laugh softly at the absurdity. The caravan around you hums with quiet activity. A camel sneezes, a trader whispers a secret, a child laughs at a scuttling lizard. It's easy to see why tea and conversation were inseparable here. Each cup is not just a drink, but a linnets to landigans, engine disputes, or even give ministration to men's long thoughts. Historians still argue whether monks deliberately created tea culture to aid meditation, or if it simply grew organically as a companion to long, arduous journeys. Either way, the connection between travel, gossip, and tea is undeniable. You feel it yourself. Moving with the caravan, the world reduced to a few square miles of sand, stone, and ritual. As evening approaches, the golden light fades to soft pink, and the shadows stretch long across the valley. The air is cooler, carrying the faint scent of distant oases. You sip your final cup for the day, letting the warmth linger in your chest. The caravan stirs once more, preparing to move before darkness falls. You glance at Yusuf, the camels, the path ahead, and feel a gentle serenity wash over you. A small taste of the centuries of ritual, travel, and stories carried along this road.
By the third day, the dunes begin to flatten into hard-packed clay, and the air smells faintly of salt. You can see the shimmer of heat lifting off the horizon like a mirage. The caravan has entered Tong territory now, 8th century China at its most cosmopolitan,
where tea was no longer just a curiosity from Yeongnan, but the quiet heartbeat of an empire. You trudge beside Yusuf, your sandals scraping the earth, and he begins to tell you about the tea houses of Chang'an, the Tang capital, now known as Xi'an. Imagine it. Streets buzzing with camels, scholars, soldiers, poets, musicians, and perfumers from across Asia. The city glows with red lanterns and smells of jasmine, sesame oil, and the faint, grassy sweetness of roasted tea. Everyone drinks it, Yusuf says, tightening a strap. From monks to magistrates, poets to postal couriers. They say a man without tea is a door without hinges. You grin at that. A door without hinges sounds like your mornings before caffeine. You wander away from the shimmering, oily crowd and step into the shadow of towering stone walls. The heat outside gives way to a cool hush within, and suddenly the noise of the city melts into something softer. Temple chants at dawn. The air is heavy with incense, thick curls of smoke spiraling upward like lazy clouds. Your ears adjust to the echoing rhythm of low voices, priests humming in unison, as though the building itself were breathing. You pause, letting the sound seep into your bones, calming and hypnotic, like an ancient lullaby. One solid fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for the general public. They were the homes of gods on earth, tended carefully by trained priests. Only the priests entered the inner sanctums, where statues of deities were bathed, dressed, and offered food each day. To outsiders, this might have looked like a private club for divine caretakers. To Egyptians, it was essential, the act that kept the universe in balance. You picture yourself standing beside the entrance as priests glide past, their shaven heads glistening with oil, linen robes whispering softly. One carries a small tray with bread and beer for the god. Another swings a censer, releasing puffs of frankincense that sting your nose but soothe your mind. You cough politely, trying not to ruin the moment with a sneeze. The chants rise and fall, words long familiar to the priests but foreign to your ears. Still, the rhythm is almost musical, vibrating in the stone, echoing across chambers painted with lotus blossoms, falcons, and stars. Some hymns are hymns to Ra, the sun god, others to Amun or Isis or Hathor. Each name feels like a secret key whispered into the morning. Historians still argue whether the chants were meant as literal communication with the gods or as performances to maintain cosmic order, though in the echoing hush, the distinction hardly seems to matter. A quirky little detail: some rituals involved awakening statues by ritually opening their mouths. Priests would touch the lips of stone with sacred tools, breathing life into the carved figure for the day's ceremonies. You can imagine someone fumbling the delicate ritual, tapping the statue in the wrong place, and earning disapproving glares from colleagues. Even gods, it seems, expected good morning manners. Nearby, a priest sprinkles water from the Nile, its droplets catching the light like tiny gems. Egyptians believed this act purified both the space and the worshippers, linking them back to the river that sustained all life. You remember the washerwomen by the banks, scrubbing laundry at dawn, and realize that ritual purification and daily chores were not so different, both ways of making order out of the day. The smell of incense deepens as you move closer to the sanctuary. The fragrance is layered: sweet myrrh, smoky frankincense, sharp juniper. It clings to your skin, weaving itself into your imagination until you feel drowsy, drifting. The hum of voices continues, steady, like waves rolling on the sea. Your own breath slows to match the cadence, your shoulders relaxing with every repeated note. Historians still debate the accessibility of these rituals.
Were common Egyptians able to hear the chants from outside, or were they completely excluded from the mysteries? Some argue that the sound carried deliberately, reaching the city's edge, reminding everyone that the gods were being honored. Others believe the rituals were private, cloistered away. You stand here, half in and half out, straining to listen, lulled by what you can hear. You watch as a group of musicians joins in, their sistrums rattling with a metallic shimmer, drums thudding softly. The music twines with the voices like threads weaving into a tapestry. A priestess sways gently, her movements so slow they look like water rippling. The moment feels less like a performance and more like a sunrise, inevitable, steady, peaceful. Quirky little detail? Some rituals involved using food as offerings to the gods, setting out dishes of bread, meat, and fruit before the statues. Afterwards, the food was redistributed among temple staff. Imagine the gods nodding politely, letting the priests do all the eating. You can't help but smirk at the thought of a divine feast doubling as the world's earliest office lunch program. The light inside the temple shifts as the sun rises higher, spilling through narrow slits high in the walls. Dust motes drift lazily in the beams, glowing like tiny stars. For a moment, you feel as though you're standing inside the sky itself, wrapped in chants and incense, suspended between earth and eternity. Your eyelids grow heavy. The chants keep rolling, voices dipping low, then swelling like the tide, steady, predictable, endless. Somewhere outside, the city bustles on, but here the world narrows to sound, smoke, and stone. You rest against a cool wall, the vibrations of the chants humming through your back. And just when you think it might stop, it continues, soft, steady, and soothing, like an ancient lullaby meant not just for gods, but for anyone drifting nearby.
By now, the heat presses down like a heavy blanket, and you shade your eyes with one hand as you step into a field where workers are slathering something suspicious on their arms. At first glance, it looks like mud. Then you notice the smell, a sharp, earthy tang mixed with something faintly unpleasant. You squint, realizing you're watching people rub a concoction of crocodile dung and fermented plant matter across their skin. This, you realize, is sunscreen, or at least their best attempt at it. You're grateful for modern SPF, but the Egyptians seem determined to improvise. One fact historians agree on: the Egyptian sun was brutal, and protection was necessary. They wore lightweight linen and wide collars, but bare skin still faced the rays. Mixtures of animal fats, oils, and plant extracts often doubled as moisturizers and sun barriers. Crocodile dung is one of those stranger recipes mentioned in later texts, though scholars still argue whether it was ever widespread or more symbolic, some quirky remedy offered to wealthy households with access to crocodiles. Either way, imagine sitting under the sun with that smeared across your shoulders, trying to look dignified. The smell aside, you can almost admire the creativity. These people experimented constantly with mixtures. Oils from castor beans, sesame, and moringa were common, along with red ochre rubbed on cheeks not just for beauty, but for added protection. In effect, they layered style and survival together, wearing cosmetics like a second skin against the desert. Nearby, a farmer sits with his sandals off, coating his feet in a mixture of honey and animal fat, muttering about cracked heels. You wrinkle your nose at the stickiness, but honey was a prized healing agent. The Egyptians knew it slowed infections, and modern science nods in agreement. A quirky little miracle hidden in the same ingredient you'd drizzle on toast. Children chase each other in the dust, their heads gleaming with oil that serves as both sunblock and pest repellent. One boy, gleeful, smears his face with more than he probably needs, ending up shiny as a polished jar. His mother sighs, scrubs at him with a cloth, and the crowd chuckles. Clearly, kids wasting sunscreen isn't a new phenomenon. It's been happening for millennia. Historians still debate how much of these recipes were daily habits versus ritual acts tied to gods and magic. Was crocodile dung really believed to protect, or was it more about invoking Sobek, the crocodile god, for strength? A mixture of science and faith ran through all Egyptian remedies. After all, if you believed the gods guarded you, maybe you felt cooler even when the sun baked your shoulders. As the heat rises, you find shade beneath a palm tree, watching people reapply their concoctions. The mixture glistens in the sunlight, creating an odd shimmer, almost like scales. Perhaps that was intentional, a way of blending with nature, wearing the shimmer of the Nile's creatures as armor against the day. A merchant strolls by, carrying jars of perfumed oil. He shouts about their benefits, comparing his wares to ordinary dung-based remedies. You suppress a laugh, realizing you've just witnessed the world's first sunscreen marketing battle. The crowd gathers, sniffing the jars, bartering over prices, and choosing between smells like roses and smells like crocodile enclosure. The choice, you suspect, is an easy one. You lean back, lulled by the mix of voices and the sound of cicadas buzzing in the reeds. The smell isn't exactly relaxing, though if you focus on the myrrh and sandalwood oils, you can almost pretend. Still, part of you can't stop thinking about the unfortunate worker whose job it was to collect crocodile dung in the first place. Imagine telling your family that's your career, official crocodile collector. Sleepy or not, that's a title no resume should have to bear. And yet, it worked in its way. Oils, fats, and strange mixtures shielded skin, warded off insects, and gave people the comfort of feeling prepared against the desert. Beneath the humor lies a truth. Survival often depends on strange creativity. Even if the method smells awful, it represents resilience, trial and error, the constant negotiation between human bodies and a sun that never stops shining. The day stretches on, the air shimmering with heat. Farmers wipe their brows, women adjust their headscarves, and children dart between patches of shade, still shiny with oil. You feel your own skin prickle in sympathy, grateful for your imaginary sunscreen, though maybe you'll pass on the crocodile dung recipe. Instead, you let yourself be carried along by the gentle rhythm of everyday care, the buzz of insects, and the occasional squawk of a goose who clearly disapproves of your lack of fashion-forward sun protection. And as you drift further along the Nile's edge, you realize that even here, amidst odd remedies and quirky concoctions, the Egyptians' determination to thrive in their desert home feels strangely soothing. It's survival, yes, but with a touch of humor, and maybe even a whiff of sandalwood over the dung.